Hello there and welcome to the clinic. So today we're going to be looking at a specific textbook that helped me along my optometric journey. We're going to be doing a little bit of reading and finger tracing through some of the technical ocular diagrams to try and help you learn a little bit and generate some quality ASMR. So, I'm introducing today Clinical Anatomy of the Eye. This is second edition. The authors are Snell and Lemp. Just looking inside briefly. Illustrations by Ira Grunther. Those are the acknowledgements there. We're going to be looking at their very technical and lovely textbook. So, what better place to start than at the front cover with this diagram here. So just looking here, we have the lacrimal apparatus just there. You have your eyeball here. See the sclera and the fine blood vessels, the iris, which we'll be certainly looking at in more depth today. The opening here is the pupil. You have your eyelid margins here. Ocularis muscle there, eyelashes here, and you have your tear ducts here. You have your upper punctum there and the lower punctum here, so the tears will drain along the tear rivers, upper and lower, through the ducts. You have your upper canaliculus and the lower canaliculus here, nasolacrimal sac here, and draining downwards to the nasal cavity. So that is the very technical cover there. So we're going to dive to a specific area selected. This is a very old book. Some of the pages are a little bit loose. Okay, so this is our first diagram here, showing the arrangement of smooth muscle fibres in the ciliary body. Note the relationship of the ciliary body to the iris, the anterior chamber, the canal of Schlem, and the corneoscleral limbus, which is here. Your transparent cornea here, your opaque sclera. This is the junction here. And then you have your ciliary processes, circular fibres, ciliary muscle, forms part of the choroid and joins there to the iris. This little space here is the anterior chamber and the trabecular meshwork, where the aqueous drains from the eye. This is where the drainage, or most of the drainage, is occurring through to the canal of Schlem. The canal of Schlem there. Okay, so just using this specific coloured overlay, read more comfortably. It just talks about the iris. The iris is a thin, contractile, pigmented diaphragm with a central aperture known as the pupil. It is suspended in the aqueous humour between the cornea and the lens. The periphery of the iris, which is attached to the anterior surface of the ciliary body, is called the ciliary margin or root of the iris. The pupil is surrounded by the pupillary margin of the iris. The iris, measuring about 12 millimeters in diameter, is thickest about 2 millimeters from the pupillary margin and is thinnest at the ciliary margin. Okay, we just have a little bit more information there if you want to have a little read. But we're going to flip the page. Have a look at what we've got next. We have some more technical diagrams here. So it looks as though we're looking at the anterior part of the iris here, and some labelling of certain structures. So you have your collarettes here, your collarettes, and between them you have the iris crypts. The iris crypts there. That's little. And then you have the contraction furrows here. These are the contraction furrows. Because we have two muscles in the iris, allowing for dilation and constriction. There is your open space. And looking at the posterior surface of the iris, so essentially we're inside the eye, looking out through the pupil. We have your radial contraction folds there, radial contraction folds. So looking at the text, A is a diagram showing the features seen on the anterior surface of the iris. The pupillary zone extends from the pupil to the collarettes, and the ciliary zone extends from the collarettes to the peripheral edge of the iris, where it joins the ciliary body. Just to confirm, diagram B shows the features on the black posterior surface of the iris. Note the radial contraction folds, which are most prominent in the pupillary region there. The pupillary region. Okay, just moving on. Information here. Let's have a look. Photomicrograph of a section of the iris close to the pupillary margin here. Note the formation of the ruff from the pigmented posterior epithelium. So you have your pigment cells here, your melanocytes. Stromal layer here. There is the pupil, the pigmented posterior epithelial surface of the iris here, and this is the ruff. It's known as the ruff. Okay, we're just looking at B here. It's another photomicrograph of a section of iris showing the general structure. Note the absence of epithelium on the anterior surface, the presence of numerous pigmented melanocytes in the stroma. It's looking there, pigmentary cells, and the posterior epithelial cells packed with melanin. Here's the posterior chamber of the eye, the pigmented posterior epithelium there. And just moving on here, need a little bit more assistance. Scanning electron micrograph of the anterior surface of the iris. A. The surface to be covered by an incomplete layer of fibroblasts, which are the arrows. Here we have the fibroblasts, the melanocytes containing large numbers of melanin granules, as shown here. And moving on. Just have another diagram here showing the arrangement of the fibres of the dilator muscle and the sphincter muscle of the iris there. So one is arranged like so, and the other like so. This allows for pupil constriction and dilation. Just looking at this little bit of text here about pupil movements. Meiosis, which is contraction. The sphincter muscle constricts the pupil in bright lights and during accommodation. This occurs in response to parasympathetic nerve activity. So that occurs due to parasympathetic nervous innervation there. It will constrict in bright light and during accommodation. So when you focus on something close, the crystalline lens becomes larger. Mydriasis, dilation. The dilator pupillae dilates the pupil in low intensity light and during excitement or fear. This occurs in response to sympathetic nervous activity. Okay, let's have a look what the next page holds for us. Oh yes, we have some beautiful diagrams here. Looking a little bit at the vascular supply to the eye. This diagram summarises the arterial and venous drainage of the eyeball. This is this diagram here, looking from the top of the eye. Your short posterior ciliary arteries piercing the eye here. You have your long posterior ciliary artery piercing here, travelling through the choroidal layer, nourishing the ciliary body, just here, and the iris tissue there. And on the opposite side you have your venous supply, short posterior ciliary veins, varicose vein here, and this is just draining the blood from the eye after the oxygen has been consumed. The production of carbon dioxide will drain this out. Okay, just looking at diagram B here, summarising the arterial and venous drainage of the iris. So we're looking directly at the eye here. It's the iris and pupil. Remember the long posterior ciliary artery coming round, supplying the blood, oxygen, nutrients to the iris, and we have drainage going this way, ocular drainage. Just looking at this final diagram here, this shows the arterial supply and venous drainage of the anterior portion of the eyeball. The vortex vein, which is normally present at the equator, has been included for completeness. There is your ciliary body. The vascular supply here. And now to the minor arterial circle here, the iris, anterior chamber, cornea, drainage of the aqueous going this way, through the trabecular meshwork, during the canal of Schlemm, and all the other complexities here. Okay, so that's just about everything today. One quick last look here. Just have a little quick look at the retinal layers. The retina consists of nervous tissue here. You have 10 layers of the retina. 10 layers of the retina. Here. And just want to show you some of the photoreceptors in the eye. So the two main photoreceptors are the rods under the cones, rhodopsin, iodopsin, capture light energy. So your nighttime and your daytime photoreceptors capturing light energy, converting it into neural activity, travelling this way, and then the collection of the information travels to the optic nerve head and onwards to the brain for visual perception. Just looking at the shapes of the rods and the cones, you can see how they differ, and they are embedded in the Bruch's membrane here. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed looking and learning a little bit about the ocular structures today. I will see you next time in the clinic.